This video is sponsored by Sketchfab. In this one I'm showing how to make things like frosting, whipped cream, and soft serve ice cream, but with this method you're not limited to those. What I'm showing could be used for all sorts of things if you know where to apply it. Here's a summary of what I'll cover in this video. I'll start by bringing a curve into the scene and giving it some thickness. I'll show how to give it that star shape and also pinch the ends. We'll add controls to change the radius and tilt so we can make it look like it twists. I'll use some subtle displacement to make it look irregular, then I'll show how to add sprinkles. I'll use the group input to make this more reusable, and we'll finish with decorating the scene to show it in action. As always, you can get this project file on Patreon, as well as access to my videos before they're public, coupon codes for free products, and files that I don't share anywhere else. I also donate a portion of the profits to environmental causes each month. Links for everything are in the description. Alright, let's get started. So here we are in Blender. I'm using version 3.2 for this one. This should work fine in 3.1 also. As you can see, I just have a scene set up. This is so we can put our, our frosting onto stuff. So let's just get started by adding in a curve. So Shift A under curve right here. You can add in a Bezier. Then I'll tab into edit mode, and I'm just going to hit S to scale and scale that down to 0 so it's like a single point. And I'm just going to drag this on top of the cupcake right here. And then back in edit mode, I'll just grab one of those points and pull it up like that. If you want, you can change the handles with V. I'll change that to automatic. You can see the, the handles appear. If you want, you can rotate it or whatever. I'm gonna leave mine going straight up and down though. So with this still selected, we can go into the geometry nodes workspace. So you can click up here, and if you don't see one, you can click this plus. Under general, we have geometry nodes right there. So I'm gonna click that. And if anybody's wondering why everything is rainbowy like this, you can just hit this drop down right here, viewport shading. I have a matte cap that I'm using, and I'm using this one right here. I also have cavity turned on, set to both. That just kind of accentuates the edges and makes it easier to see. So let's select this curve and click new to add a new geometry nodes tree. We're gonna use the group input so that we can keep this shape right here. And I'm just going to add a curve to mesh node. This is what we're going to use to give it some thickness. We just need to put a profile curve in here. And for that, we'll use a star right here. And we can plug it in right there. So my scene is pretty small, so this star is way too big. So we can turn the radius down to something really small like 0.01. And I'll change this to 0.02. Now it's a little smaller. We can tell what's going on. So this star is a good shape to start from, but I want the edges to be a little more round, so we can do that with a fillet curve node and just drop it in right here. It's gonna, explode like this because we have to check limit radius. That will make it so it doesn't try to push it too far. I'll bring this down really low, and we'll turn this up just a little bit, 0.005 maybe. Even that's too big, so I'll add in a math node and set this to divide. This is a thing that I like to do to change numbers that are really, really small. I'll just set this second value to like 1,000, and we can plug this in. And now I have much more fine-tuned control right here. So I can just push that in a little, and it's going to start making things round. If you set this to poly, we can make the edges have more points like that. I'll have it set to 2. It's okay for it to be low poly. And I want to be able to pinch the edges so it's not this big log thing. So we can do that with a set radius. I'll use the set curve radius node and just drop it in right here. So this lets us, obviously change the radius. And I'll bring in another node that's just called radius. And this is going to get the radius of our curve for us. If you hover over your viewport and hit N and go into edit mode with this selected, under item, you can see we have radius, weight, and tilt and stuff like that. Plugging this directly in will make it so that you can still control the radius in here, which is pretty nice when you're doing things manually like this. If you don't have this plugged in, then these won't work anymore. So I like to leave this plugged in, but we can also override it by multiplying it. So I'll add in a math node, set this to multiply. Then I'll bring in a spline parameter node. I explain what this is in depth in my tutorial about curve, so you can check that out if you want like a longer explanation for this, but I'll plug the factor into here, and you can see it will pinch at one end, but because we're multiplying it by this radius right here, we still have control over this. in here too. But you know, if you multiply it by 0, then you won't be able to turn that up if you're multiplying it, because anything multiplied by 0 is 0. That's just how it works. So I want to pinch both ends, so a way we can do that is with a float curve right here. And I want to create a point in the middle. You can just click and drag, and I'll hold Control, and that makes it snap to the grid right here. And I'll just pull that up in the center right there and pull this one down. So this is going to disappear now, and that's because we just have 2 points. So for this to actually make this shape, we need more points in here. We can do that with a resample curve node. So I'll bring a resample curve in, drop that in right there. You can see now we have something. If you go into wireframe up here, you'll be able to actually see how far apart these are. And you can, you know, turn it up like that if you want. I like to set mine to length, and I'll just set this to something small like 0.05, 0.005. That looks pretty good. We can make this even closer if we want, but I'm going to leave it pretty low poly for now. And I like using length because if we drag this point up, you'll see all of the points, all of these edges stay kind of like the same distance from each other. It doesn't get more low poly as we make it longer. So I think that's pretty nice. So what I like to do with this float curve right here is grab this point right here and just move it to the side so we can push this part down like that and get more of like a dollop shape. Now we can add another point in here, and I'll just maybe put that right there so we get that shape right there. So one other thing we can do is change the curve tilt. So once again, if you hover over here and hit N and you're in edit mode, you see we have this tilt option, and that lets us kind of like twist our points right there. We can also do that in geometry nodes if you don't want to have to do that manually. So we can use set curve tilt right here. And we're going to do the same thing that we did with the radius, because we also have a curve tilt node in here. So we can make it so that we can adjust it over here if we want, or we can adjust it in geometry nodes, like kind of at the same time. So I'll plug this in, but instead of multiplying it, I'll add it. So I'll just duplicate this with Shift D, drag it in, and change this to add, and set that to 0. Now I want to use the spline parameter for this also, and I'll just duplicate this, make a multiply node, and plug this in, drop it in right there. So now when we turn multiply up, it'll twist it like that. And I think that's pretty nice. But if we want, we can also, you know, change things over here too. So I like to have the option to use both. So now I want to make this look a little more irregular and, you know, give it some imperfections. So over here, you know, after it's already turned into a mesh right there, I'm going to add a subdivision surface. So this is going to add some more geometry in here, and it's also going to smooth it out. As you can see, when we turn it on and off, it's kind of smoothing the edges out. That's another reason why I left the edges low poly right here with only a count of 2, because when we subdivide it, it's going to smooth that out anyway. We could even turn this down to 1 if we want, and it'll look good. So now that this is a little higher poly, we can use a set position node in here, and we can bring in a noise texture right here. And I want to use this to displace this right here, but I want it to go in the normal direction. Let's add in a math node right here. So we can plug the factor in right here, change this to multiply. The multiply is just going to affect the strength. So if we plug it into here, turn this down to 0 and turn it up slowly, you can see it's moving it, but it's kind of moving it like side to side. I want this to push away in every direction, in the normal direction. So we can do that by bringing in the normal right here and just multiplying, you know, these two right here. But because this is a vector, we can't use a regular math node. We have to use a vector math node right here. So I'll just plug this in, plug that in also, and I'll change this to multiply. So now when we turn this up, it should push out like that. Now you might notice that when I do this, the tip kind of expands like that. I don't want that to happen. In order to make that not happen, we need to use the spline parameter again, but we need to capture it. If we try to use it and just multiply it with this, it's not going to work. We have to capture it while it's still a curve, so I'll add in a capture attribute right here. I'll bring in another spline parameter just so it's closer. And we can plug the factor in right here. Now instead of using the factor from here, we can use the attribute like that. I'll just move these and add another multiply right there. And we can plug the attribute in from afar like that. Now you can see that the tip stays closed like that, but the bottom will inflate. So we can just grab this over here, same shape, and I'll just plug this in to the value, and we can plug this in over here like that. And now it should work properly like that. So I think the noise texture is quite a bit too small. It's like, you know, we want more detail, so we can turn this up a little higher, maybe around there, something like that. And we can turn this down pretty low, 0.005 maybe. We just tweak these until it looks good. I think that seems okay. And now let's just go into edit mode over here and kind of place this where we want it to be. So I want a third point in here to control things. So I'll just select both sides, right click and subdivide, and that will create that third point in there. Now we can drag this down. I'll drag this down a little too. And if you want to scale a point, if you want to change the radius, you can hit Alt S, and that's how you scale curves like that. So we can do that. Push it down over here, something like that. And we can, you know, curl the end if we want to, like that. And let's give this a little more twist also. I can do that over here. I think that looks pretty good. Now we haven't changed the shading yet, but let's see how it looks when it's rendered. I think it's looking pretty good so far. Let's take a break to talk about the sponsor, Sketchfab. Sketchfab is an online marketplace where you can buy and sell 3D models. They have more than 3 million models to choose from, and deciding which models you want to download is actually pretty fun because you can inspect them in the browser to see them from any angle, check out the materials and the geometry. Sketchfab also has importer add-ons that make it really easy to get your models into your projects. So if you're looking for assets to fill your scenes, check out Sketchfab. All right, I think this should have some sprinkles on it. So let's add some sprinkles. We can put that after we displace it over here. So I'm going to use a distribute points on faces right here. But you can see when we plug it in directly, it's going to make our geometry disappear. So we need to join this with a join geometry node right here. We can plug that in. And like I said before, this is a very small scene. These are like real life size. So we're gonna have to turn this up quite a bit before we start seeing particles, and they're gonna be pretty large. So to make this easier to look at, we'll just start instancing. We can use an instance on points right here, plug that in. And now I want to make a sprinkle shape. So for that, I'm actually going to start with a cube, and I'm going to do that in geometry nodes right here. We can use a cube, and I'm going to preview this with Alt, Shift, and left click right there. If you want to do that, you have to have the Node Wrangler enabled. That's under Edit and Preferences, and you can just turn on Node Wrangler. So this is way too big. Let's just make this a little smaller. I'll set this to 0.01. Now I'll scale this out maybe 0.04 on the X, like that. And we can add a subdivision surface node right here. Let's add a few more loops on the X right here. So I'll turn that up to maybe just to 4. And we can set the subdivision surface 1 higher. And I think that's a pretty good shape for our sprinkle. Obviously it's way too big, but we can just use a scale elements node. Just because these numbers are getting pretty small, I'll just scale this down to like 0.3, maybe 0.25. And that seems like a pretty good sprinkle size for this. We don't want to make them too small. Now let's plug this into instance right here and plug this back in. So now we have a few sprinkles over here. Let's change this to Poisson disk and turn this up really high. I'll just turn it up to something like 20,000 or something like that. So it's pretty high right now. And let's change the distance minimum to something like 0.008. That way none of them are going to be overlapping. And now we can plug the rotation in right here, and it should match the rotation. So these still look a little too regular. Like, as you can see, they're all completely flat. So a thing we can do is kind of randomize it a little. We can use a rotate instances node right here. And let's see, we could rotate it on the Z like that. So let's bring in a combine XYZ. That way we can target only the Z right there. Plug that in. And I'll grab a random value node like that. And you can see they're starting to randomize now. You can just turn that up however high you want. Or if you want to be precise, you can turn that to tau, T-A-U, and that's just the same as 360 degrees, except it's in radians, which is what this uses instead of degrees. So if you look closely, you can see they're still shaded flat, so we can shade these smooth. I'll just do that over here where our cube is, and add a set shade smooth node right here. And now they're shaded smooth, so that looks a little better. Now, if we look at this in render view again, you'll see that nothing has a material. So we can add some materials to these. I'll just add a set material node right here. This one is going to be for the whipped cream. You can see it's all of these are making the whipped cream over here, or frosting, or whatever this is, it could be anything. And we'll drop one in right here, and this is going to be for the sprinkles. We don't have any frosting or sprinkle materials yet, so we can add them in over here. And I'll just click the plus twice. We'll add one in, that will be the frosting, and this one will be the sprinkles, and we can rename them. Now that we have two materials to choose from, we can set them over here. So this one is frosting, and this one is sprinkles. Now I'm just going to go over to the shading editor real quick, right here. And it seems like if I get too close, it's kind of clipping in, so I'll change the view clip start to 0.01. I'll change the end to 100. So I'll select the sprinkles over here. And if you watch my instances video, I talk a little more about how to texture instances like this. But basically what I'm going to do is give each of these like a random color. We can do that with the object info node right here. And we have this random socket right here. And when we plug it in, we can see everything gets a random grayscale value between 0 and 1. So we can use this to, choose some colors. I'll just bring in a color ramp right here. And I'm just going to delete this black one. So we have a white one, and then I'll add a few in. I'll add maybe 5 like that. I'll change this to constant, and with this drop down right here, I can choose distribute from left, and that will distribute them evenly. So let's select some colors. The first one I'll leave white. This one right here, I'll make red, blue, yellow. Let's add one more. This one will be green. I'll make that darker. And this one will be pink. And I'll distribute stops from left again, so they're more even. And now we have some like rainbowy colors going on. If you want, you can affect the roughness or whatever you want. Or for the frosting, we can do something pretty simple. So I'll select frosting over here. I like to give this a small amount of subsurface scattering. So for that, I'll add in an RGB node right here. Turn the value all the way up. Maybe set this to yellow, and then turn the saturation down. So I want it to be like very slightly yellow, like that. I'll plug that into the base color, the subsurface color, and I'll plug it into the subsurface radius too, and change this to something pretty small, so like 0.002 or something like that. You have to be careful with subsurface scattering, especially if you're using really small objects, because the scale of your object over here, the dimensions, are going to play a role in how much this is really affecting how it looks. So I'll turn the roughness down to like 0.25, so it's kind of shiny. I like that. And we can use a noise texture. I'll hit Control T. That's just, the node wrangler adds in these two nodes when you do that. I'll use the object coordinate. Now I'll grab a bump node. We can add some bump mapping to make this look even more irregular if we want. I'll plug this into the height and plug this into the normal. So this is going to be a little too much, but it's kind of hard to tell because the scale needs to be turned up. Now I think the distance is way too high, so I'll set this to like 0.01. Let's see how that looks in cycles. I think that looks pretty good. Let's go back to geometry nodes over here. If you want to get really nitpicky, you can make it so that the sprinkles only appear on the top, because if we go, into wireframe, you can see they're all on the bottom too. So that's actually not too hard to do. We can just use the normal right here. We're going to make it so that they only appear on like the Z normal, which is, the global Z normal. So only coming from above, basically. We can get a separate XYZ right here, plug this in, and we can just plug the Z in right there. And then I'll make it so there will be no sprinkles on the bottom. as if you're like, you know, sprinkling them from the top. So I want to be able to reuse this, this frosting for all of these other things too. So let's make it a little more reusable. So we can use this group input and plug in whatever we want. I'll plug in this right here. And now when we go over to our modifiers, you can see we have that option right there. So we can change, you know, the name and everything. Hover over here and hit N. It'll, you know, make the sidebar pop out. We can go to group, and here is where we have all of our options. So when we click on the value, we have all these fields to fill in if we want. I can just change this to twist, and now we can affect how much it's being twisted over here, and it affects it right there. Let's actually duplicate this over just so we can see how it works. So we have these two different, you know, bits of frosting or whatever, but these controls over here will only apply to the one that you have currently selected. So it's not going to mess up our other one, even though it's the same node tree, which is pretty cool. So we can duplicate this around too if we want. I'll use this for the radius also. We can just add a multiplier right there and plug that in. And I'll change this to 1. And this will allow us to, you know, change our radius on the fly if we want. And we can still change it in edit mode also with Alt-S like that. If you want, you could also plug this into points, and, you know, we can change how many points this has right here. Because if you look at like piping tips for frosting and stuff like that, they come in all different shapes and whatnot. Grab this over here. We can plug this into the subdivision surface if we want to make that, you know, higher or lower resolution. We can also make it so that there are no sprinkles if we want. So we can bring in a switch node right here and just drop it in. Now I'll put this into true instead, and you can see they both disappear. I want this to be on by default, so I'll turn the switch on right there. And we can grab another group input. I'll just grab it from over there, Shift D to duplicate, like that. And I'll plug that in right there. Now we have a switch that we can turn the sprinkles on and off with, like that. And the last one I'll do is add one for density control. Again, I'll just duplicate it from over here and change this to sprinkle density. Oh yeah, I also want to be able to change the materials from the outside, so we can just grab those over here, plug them in, and give them some names. One more thing I forgot to do is I want to add some controls to for the pinching right here. So we can add in a map range right here. And if we change this from max down, you can see it kind of changes where the pinching starts like that. And I think that's a pretty good control to have. So I'll plug that in right there. We can change, you know, we can name this like pinch start or something. So now we have these all set up and we can control everything over here. We don't have to touch our geometry nodes at all. So I'll just go back to layout mode over here. So now let's decorate our scene. I want to, for the ice cream cone, I want to kind of create like a spiral. We actually have some spiral primitives with Shift A under curve. At the very bottom, we have curve spirals. If you don't see these, you might have to turn them on. If you go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and you search for curve, we have the extra objects thing for curves right here. You can just check that and it will give you the spiral. So I'll select this dollop right here, hit tab to go into edit mode, and I'm just going to delete all the points. So we're still in edit mode, and when I hit Shift A, add in a spiral, I'll choose Archimedean. Now you might have to play with these values over here. You can just, you know, open that up on the side before you click anything. So I set mine to have 5 turns. I set the radius to 0 and the radius growth to 0.02. Depending on how big your scene is, you might have to, you know, play with these to get something looking a little better. Now that we have this, let's just change our pinch start. I'll turn that down quite a bit lower because I only want the end to pinch. So I'll turn that down to like 0.1 or something like that. Now back in edit mode, let's just scale this down like that. And it seems like the radius is a little too big too, so scale that down maybe right about there. That might be like a good radius to start with. Now let's grab the very end right here and turn on proportional editing up there. I want connected only turned on, and I'm going to choose sharp right here. So now I can just pull this up with G and Z, and you can use your scroll wheel on your mouse to, change how much this is being affected. So I'll scroll so that the very bottom is not being affected like that, so it's still kind of flat. And I'll just pull this up, maybe right about there. I want to have the tip sticking up just a little, so I'll make the area of influence quite a bit smaller right there. You play around with this and try to get some values that you like. You can see what that looks like in cycles right here. Maybe turn the radius up a little. It's kind of cutting through the cone a little, so maybe drag that up. So we have our ice cream right here. Let's just duplicate this over. I'll place that right there. Another thing we can do with curves is we can draw them on things. So let's go back into edit mode right here. I'm just going to delete all of these in edit mode so that, we're not deleting our object. Now hit T to open up this side panel right here, and we have this draw option. You can see if we draw, then, it'll start actually drawing things. I want to make sure that this is being drawn on the surface. So let's hit Control Z. If we open up this side panel right here, under Tool, you can set this cursor to Surface. Now it should draw on the surface that you're, drawing on, which is pretty cool. So if we want, we can pile this up, draw whatever shapes we want right here, draw a spiral, something like that. And when you already have one placed down and you draw on top of it, it should place the whipped cream on top of it, or, whatever this is, frosting, whipped cream, it could be anything. So even if you're just scribbling, this will end up looking pretty cool, and it's like a nice way to kind of automate modeling right here. That looks pretty wild. Oh, I think it was being hooked onto the light right here. So let's turn that off and just pile this up. All right, so just kind of created a big pile right here. And it's not the neatest thing, but we did it pretty quickly. Imagine trying to model this by hand. All right, that's it for this one. I'd like to thank my patrons for their support, and I'd like to thank you for watching. Have a good one.